She was the first woman who ever lived, the first wife, the first mother, the first person to feel joy and the first to feel shame, the first to fall in love, and the first to bury a child. We know her name, Eve. It is one of the most famous names in human history. And yet, when you ask most people what they actually know about her life, they can tell you only one thing, that she ate a piece of fruit in a garden. But that is not her life. That is one moment. Eve lived a whole life, a long one, the ancient accounts say, stretching across centuries. And almost none of it is the story you think you know. Because the real story of Eve is not mainly about a garden, or a piece of fruit, or a single mistake. It is about a mother, the first mother who ever lived, and the grief that no one ever talks about. Because Eve was the first woman to hold a newborn child and feel that overwhelming, world-changing love. And she was also the first woman to lose a child, in the most horrifying way a mother can. One of her sons murdered the other, and she had to go on living for centuries, carrying a grief that no human being before her had ever felt, with no one in all the world who could understand it, because she was the first. In this video, we are going to tell the entire life of Eve, not just the garden, but all of it. The creation, the choice that changed everything, the exile into a harsh new world, the joy of becoming the first mother, and the unbearable grief that came after. The part of her story almost no one ever tells. Built from the account in Genesis and the earliest traditions of the faith. This is the complete life of the first woman who ever lived. And it begins not with a fruit, but with a breath. The moment the first woman opened her eyes. Imagine opening your eyes and being the first of your kind. No mother to hold you, no history behind you, no language yet spoken by anyone but the man beside you. Just a world, brand new and you, fully grown, fully aware, the first woman who would ever live. The account in Genesis tells it in just a few verses. After the first man, Adam, was formed, God said it was not good for him to be alone. And so the first woman was made, us, formed, the text says poetically, from the man's own side, so that she would be his equal and his companion, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. Think about the wonder of that first meeting. The first man saw the first woman, and the ancient text records the first human words ever spoken about another person, a cry of recognition and joy. Here, at last, was someone like him, someone to share the world with. The first companionship, the first love, and the world they lived in was a paradise, the Garden of Eden. The account describes it as a place of staggering abundance and beauty, rivers flowing through it, trees heavy with fruit, every kind of living creature, and at its center, the presence of God himself, walking with them in the cool of the day. This was Eve's first home, a world with no death, no suffering, no shame, no grief. She woke into perfection. She knew for a time what no human being since has ever fully known. Life as it was meant to be, without a single shadow on it. And she was not yet called Eve. That name would come later, and it would come with a meaning that tells you everything about who she would become. But in the garden, she was simply the woman, the first woman, living in the first home, in the only perfect world there has ever been. She had been given everything, a perfect world, a companion, the presence of God, and freedom, almost total freedom. There was only one limit in all of paradise. One tree in the middle of the garden whose fruit they were told not to eat. One boundary, one no in a world of endless yes. And it is worth pausing on what that single limit really was, because it tells us something about the world Eve lived in. She had thousands of trees, endless abundance, total freedom, and just one restriction. The no was tiny compared to all the yes. This was not a harsh world full of rules. It was a world of almost unimaginable generosity, with a single boundary set in the middle of it, like a single locked door in a mansion of 1,000 open rooms. And we should sit too, with what Eve had in those early days that no human since has ever fully had. She lived without fear. Think about that. A life with no fear of anything at all. No fear of death, because death did not yet exist. No fear of hunger, of cold, of loss, of being hurt, of being alone. No anxiety. No shame about her body or herself. No regret about the past. No dread about the future. She woke each day into total peace, in total trust, in the presence of the one who made her. It is a state of being the rest of us can barely imagine. And Eve lived in it, for a time, as her ordinary daily reality. This is important to understand, because it makes what came next so much more tragic. Eve did not fall because she was miserable, or deprived, or desperate. She fell from a position of having everything. That is part of what makes her story so achingly human. We tend to think we would never make her mistake, that if we had paradise, we would simply keep it. But Eve shows us the truth about the human heart, that even with everything, the eye can still be drawn to the one thing held back. Even in paradise, the human heart can be made to feel that it is missing something. And it is here that the most famous and most misunderstood moment of Eve's life takes place. The moment that has defined her unfairly for thousands of years. Because what happened at that tree was not simply a woman being greedy for fruit. It was something far more human, far more subtle, and far more tragic than that. Something was about to speak to her, something cunning. And it was going to offer her not a fruit, but a promise. The account in Genesis introduces a new figure into the story, the serpent, described as the most cunning of all the creatures. And the serpent spoke to the woman. Notice how it began, not with a command, not with force, with a question, designed to plant a doubt. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? It was a distortion. God had not forbidden every tree, only one. But the question reframed everything. Suddenly, the focus was not on the 1,000 things she had been given, but on the one thing she had been denied. That is how the oldest temptation in the world works. It takes your eyes off everything you have and fixes them on the one thing you do not. Eve answered honestly. They could eat from any tree, she said, except the one in the middle, that one they must not eat or even touch, or they would die. And then the serpent told her the lie that has echoed through every human heart ever since. You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Think about what was really being offered here, not just a piece of fruit. The serpent was offering her the chance to be like God, to know what God knows, to decide for herself what was good and what was evil, rather than trusting the one who made her. It was an offer of independence, of control, of being the author of her own life. And the account describes, with painful honesty, what Eve saw when she looked at the tree now. She saw that the fruit was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that it was desirable to make one wise. Good, beautiful, and promising wisdom, every kind of desire, all at once, focused on the one forbidden thing. And she took it, and she ate, and she gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate too. We have to be fair to Eve here, because history has not been. For thousands of years, she has been blamed as the woman who ruined everything, the temptress, the cause of all human suffering. But read the account closely. Adam was with her. He said nothing. He did not stop her. He did not argue. He took the fruit and ate it just as readily. The choice was shared. The fall was human, not female. And what Eve reached for is what every human being has reached for ever since, not fruit. The desire to be in control, to decide good and evil for ourselves, to be our own God. Eve's choice was not a strange, ancient sin we cannot understand. It is the most human choice there is. It is the choice we all make every day. She was simply the first to make it. And the serpent had told her one true thing. Her eyes were opened, but what they opened to was not the glory of being like God. It was something she had never known before. For the first time in human history, the first woman felt shame. The account says their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they were ashamed. They sewed together leaves to cover themselves. And when they heard God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, the presence they had once welcomed with joy, they did something no human had ever done before. They hid. Think about how much had changed in a single choice. Before, they had walked with God openly, without fear, without shame. Now, for the first time, they were afraid. They hid. The relationship that had been the heart of paradise was broken, and Eve felt all of it for the first time. The first fear, the first guilt, the first desire to hide from the one who made her. And then came the reckoning. God called them out. And here, again, the account shows us something deeply human. God asked Adam what he had done. And Adam blamed Eve. "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit." And Eve blamed the serpent. "The serpent deceived me." The first sin was immediately followed by the first blame, the first finger-pointing, the first breakdown of trust between the man and the woman. And then the consequences were spoken. The world itself would change. There would be pain now. Struggle. The ground would resist the man's work. And to the woman, God spoke words that would shape Eve's entire future and the meaning of her whole life. He spoke of the pain she would now know in bringing forth children. And here is the moment that gives Eve her name. Because right after all of this, right after the curse, the consequences, the shadow falling over the world, Adam turned to his wife and named her. And the account tells us what he called her and why. He named her Eve, which means living, or mother of all the living. Because the text says, she would become the mother of everyone who would ever live. Think about the wonder of that. At the darkest moment of her life, cast out, ashamed, facing a world of pain, she was given a name that looked forward, not backward. Not a name of shame, a name of life. The mother of all the living. In the very shadow of death entering the world, she was named for life. It is one of the most hopeful moments in the whole account, hidden right in the middle of the tragedy. And then came the exile. They were sent out of the garden, out of paradise, into the harsh world beyond. The account says an angel with a flaming sword was placed to guard the way back, so they could never return. Imagine that walk for Eve, leaving the only home she had ever known, the perfect world, gone. Behind her, paradise. Ahead, a hard and unknown world of thorns and toil, and now, eventually, death. She walked out of Eden as the first exile, into a world no human had ever lived in before, and she would never see the garden again. And consider what exile actually meant for her, beyond the loss of comfort. In the garden, she had walked with God in the cool of the day, an intimacy with her Creator that was simply part of ordinary life. Now that closeness was broken. The easy presence was gone. She would have to live by faith now. In a world where God felt more distant, where His presence had to be sought rather than simply enjoyed. The first woman was also the first to know what it feels like when God seems far away, the first to live in the ache of a lost closeness. And she carried something else out of the garden that no one had carried before. Regret. The memory of how good it had been, and the knowledge that her own choice had helped lose it. Every night, perhaps, she remembered Eden, the abundance, the peace, the unbroken closeness, and knew it was gone, and knew her own hand was in its loss. To live with regret, with the memory of a better life you can never get back, with the knowledge of your own part in losing it. Eve was the first to carry that weight too, but she did not walk out alone. She walked out with Adam, and with a name that promised life. And in that harsh new world, that promise was about to come true. Because Eve was about to become something no woman had ever been before. A mother. Life outside the garden was hard. The account is honest about it. The ground was stubborn. Food came only through sweat and toil. The easy abundance of Eden was gone. Adam and Eve had to learn for the first time what it meant to struggle to survive. And in that hard world, Eve discovered she was pregnant. The first pregnancy. No mother had ever done this before her. No one could tell her what was happening to her body, what to expect, what it would feel like. She had no midwife, no mother of her own, no women who had gone before. She was the first woman ever to carry a child, and the first ever to give birth. Think about the fear and the wonder of that. To feel a life growing inside you and to have absolutely no one in all the world who has ever experienced it. To face the pain of childbirth, the very pain that had been spoken over her, with no knowledge of how it would go, whether she would survive it, whether the child would. And then she gave birth. The first human child ever born of a woman entered the world. A son. And the account records Eve's words at his birth. The first words a mother ever spoke about her child. She said, "I have brought forth a man with the help of the Lord." She named him Cain. Listen to the joy in those words. I have brought forth a man with the help of the Lord. After the exile, after the loss of paradise, after the shame and the curse, here was something new and good. A child. Life springing up in a fallen world. The promise of her name coming true. She was the mother of the living, and now she held the first of that living in her arms. And then she had a second son. She named him Abel. And now Eve had two boys to raise, the first children who ever grew up on the earth. Picture those years. Eve teaching her sons everything, for there was no one else to teach them. How to speak, how to work, how to survive in the hard world. She was the first mother to nurse a child, the first to soothe a crying baby in the night, the first to watch her sons take their first steps, speak their first words, grow from infants into boys, into men. Everything we now know about motherhood. Eve discovered for the first time alone, with no one to guide her. And think about how much she had to invent. There was no one to tell her how to feed a baby, how to wean a child, how to treat a fever, how to comfort a frightened toddler in the dark. There was no grandmother to pass down wisdom, no other mothers to compare notes with, no accumulated knowledge of how to raise a human being, because no human being had ever been raised before. Every single thing that mothers have passed down to daughters for thousands of years, Eve had to discover from nothing, by instinct and love, and trial and error. She was not just the first mother. She was the mother who invented motherhood itself. And there must have been such joy in it too, alongside the hardness. The first time a child said a version of mother. The first time a son ran to her for comfort. The first time she watched her boys laugh together, play together, grow strong. In a hard and fallen world, her children were the bright thing, the living proof that her name was true, that she really was the mother of the living. Whatever she had lost in the garden, she had this. Two sons, growing up under the wide sky, and a mother's love that no exile could take from her. And as they grew, the two boys became very different men. Cain, the older, worked the ground. He became a farmer, like his father. Abel, the younger, kept flocks. He became a shepherd. Two brothers, two ways of life. And a rivalry was growing between them that Eve, their mother, could feel but could not stop. Every mother of more than one child knows that helpless feeling. Watching tension grow between your children, loving them both, wanting them to love each other, and being unable to force it. Eve watched her two sons drift into rivalry. Perhaps she tried to soothe it. Perhaps she told herself it was normal, that they would grow out of it, that brothers fight and then make peace. She could not have imagined where it would lead. No one could have. Because what was about to happen had never happened before. Eve had felt many firsts. The first love, the first shame, the first exile, the first birth, the first joy of motherhood. But she was about to feel the worst first of all, the one no mother should ever feel, and it would come from her own two sons. The account tells us that both brothers brought offerings to God. Cain brought from the fruit of the ground. Abel brought from the best of his flock. And for reasons the text leaves mysterious, Abel's offering was accepted, and Cain's was not. And Cain was furious. The account says his face fell. Bitterness and jealousy took root in him, the first jealousy between brothers, the first rage of one sibling against another. And God himself warned Cain, "Sin is crouching at your door, desiring to have you, but you must rule over it." But Cain did not rule over it. He invited his brother out to the field. And there, away from everyone, away from their mother, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. The first death, not from age, not from sickness, murder. One brother killing another. The first human blood spilled on the earth was spilled by a son of Eve, and it was the blood of another son of Eve. And now we come to the part of the story that almost no one ever tells, because the account moves quickly past it. But think about what it meant for the mother. Somewhere, Eve was waiting for her sons to come home, and only one of them came. Or perhaps neither came, and she went looking. However, the news reached her. Imagine the moment the first mother in history learned that her younger son was dead, and that her older son had killed him. Think about the totality of it. In a single day, Eve lost both her sons. One was dead, and the other, the one who did it, was now cursed and driven away, sent to wander the earth as a fugitive. She did not lose one child. She lost both. One to the grave, and one to exile, and to the unbearable truth of what he had done. And here is the part that makes Eve's grief perhaps the loneliest grief there has ever been. She was the first. There was no one in all the world who had ever lost a child. No one who could say, "I understand." No one who had walked this road before her. No grandmother, no friend, no neighbor who had buried a child and survived it. There were no words for what she felt, because no one had ever felt it. She had to invent grief itself. She was the first human being to stand over the place where a child should be and find only emptiness. She was also, in a terrible way, the mother of the murderer. Every parent's nightmare is to lose a child. Eve lost one child to death and one child to the evil he himself had done. She had to carry both. The grief for Abel and the anguish over Cain. The love for both sons did not stop just because one had killed the other. A mother's heart does not work that way. She grieved them both, and the account does not give us her words. It does not record her weeping. It moves on. But that silence is its own kind of testimony, because some griefs are too deep for the record. The first mother's grief over her first lost child is left in silence, perhaps because there are no words deep enough to hold it. Let us stay in this grief a little longer, because it is the heart of her whole story, and because almost no one ever does. Think about all the things Eve had to face for the very first time, with no preparation and no precedent. She was the first to look for a child who would never come home, the first to call a name into the silence and hear nothing back. Every parent who has ever lost a child knows that particular horror, the instinct to protect, to find, to fix, suddenly meeting a wall of permanent absence. Eve felt it first, with no one having ever told her such a thing was even possible. She was the first to understand death itself. Remember, she had lived in a world without death. She had been told death would come, but she had never seen it. And now her first real encounter with death was not her own, not a stranger's, not an animal's, but her own son's. At the hands of her other son, she had to learn what death even was by having it tear her family apart. The very first funeral in human history was a mother burying her boy. And she had to face the question that has tormented grieving parents ever since. Could I have prevented this? She had raised both boys. She had watched the rivalry grow between them. Had she missed something? Could she have stopped it? Did she replay every moment, every choice, every word, searching for the place where she might have changed it? That torment, the what if, that haunts every grieving parent. Eve felt first, and felt alone. And consider the cruelty of her specific situation. When most parents lose a child, the community gathers around them. There are others who have suffered the same loss, who can sit with them, who can say, "I know." There are rituals, words, traditions built up over generations to help carry grief. Eve had none of that. There was no community. There were no rituals for death, because there had never been a death. There was no one who had walked this road. She and Adam were utterly alone, with a grief that had never existed before, in a world that had no idea what to do with it. And underneath it all was the deepest wound of a parent's heart. She still loved them both. She did not stop loving Cain because of what he had done. That is not how a mother's heart works, however much we might expect it to. She grieved the son who died, and she ached for the son who was now lost to her in a different way. Cursed, exiled, wandering the earth, carrying the unbearable weight of what he had done. 2 sons gone in a single day, and a heart that still helplessly loved them both. There may be no lonelier grief in all of human history. And then Eve had to do the hardest thing of all. She had to go on living. She did not have the choice to be undone by her grief. The world did not stop. The ground still had to be worked. Life still had to continue. And so Eve, the first mother, became also the first person to learn how to live with a broken heart. How to get up in the morning after losing a child. How to keep going when going on feels impossible. And the account tells us she did go on. Because sometime after the loss of Abel, Eve had another son. And her words at his birth show us a heart that, against all odds, still hoped. She named him Seth, and she said, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, whom Cain killed." Hear what is in those words. She names her loss directly. In place of Abel, whom Cain killed. She does not hide from it or pretend it did not happen. She speaks the terrible truth plainly, and yet, in the same breath, there is hope. God has granted me another child. She is still receiving life, still daring to love a new child, even knowing now, as no one had known before her, how badly love can be broken. That is one of the most quietly heroic things in the whole account, to love again after such a loss. To bring another child into the world knowing now what the world can do. Eve had every reason to close her heart forever. And instead, she opened it again. She kept being the mother of the living, even after death had done its worst. And think about what it took to raise Seth in the shadow of what had happened. Every fear a parent has, Eve now had with reason. Because she knew, better than anyone who would ever live, exactly how wrong things could go. She had to let this new son grow up, make his own choices, walk his own fields, knowing what one brother had done to another. She had to love him without smothering him, to hope without being paralyzed by fear. That is a courage every parent who has lost a child and gone on to love again will recognize. And Eve was the first to find it. And through Seth, the account tells us, the human family continued, the line that would eventually lead to all of humanity, and, in the Christian tradition, eventually to Jesus himself, came through this child born to a grieving mother who refused to stop hoping. The whole future of the human race ran through the courage of a woman who had lost everything and chose, anyway, to bring forth more life. The ancient traditions say Eve lived a very long life, centuries, in the reckoning of those earliest generations. Long enough to see her children's children and their children after them. Long enough to become the first grandmother, the first great-grandmother, the matriarch of a growing human family that spread across the early world. And what a strange and lonely wisdom she must have carried in those long years. She was the only person alive who remembered paradise. As the generations multiplied around her, every one of them was born into the hard world. They had never known anything else. Only Eve remembered Eden. Only Eve could say what had been lost. She was the last living memory of a perfect world, carrying it alone, telling her children and grandchildren about a garden they would never see and could scarcely imagine. The keeper of a memory no one else possessed. Imagine her in those final years. An old woman who had seen the whole arc of human experience for the very first time. She had known paradise, actual, unbroken paradise, something no human since has ever known. She had known the fall and the exile and the hard world. She had known the highest joy, holding her firstborn, and the lowest grief, losing him. She had buried a child and raised others. She carried, in one heart, the entire range of what it means to be human, because she was the first to feel all of it. Step back now and look at the whole life of the first woman. For thousands of years, Eve has been remembered for one thing: the fruit, the fall, the mistake. She has been blamed, caricatured, reduced to a single bad decision in a garden. But that is not her life. That is one moment in a life that was long and full, and more profoundly human than almost any life since. Look at what she actually was. She was the first to love, the first to marry, the first to feel shame and to know what it is to fall, the first to be exiled, to lose her home, to face a hard world, the first to carry a child, to give birth, to hold a newborn, the first to raise children, and the first to bury one, to feel the deepest grief a human heart can feel, with no one in all the world to comfort her. And through all of it, the fall, the exile, the unbearable loss, she kept living. She kept loving. She kept being the mother of the living. That name, given to her in the darkest hour, turned out to be the truest thing about her. Not the woman who fell. The mother of all the living. The source of the whole human family. Every person who has ever lived is, in the words of the account, a child of Eve. And there is something deeply comforting in her story when you tell the whole of it. Because Eve's life says that a person is not defined by their worst moment. Eve made the most consequential mistake in human history, and she was still named the mother of all the living. She still went on to love, to create, to endure. to hope. Her story did not end at the tree. It continued through exile and grief and loss, and still somehow through life and love and hope. And in the Christian tradition, Eve's story is bound to another woman's thousands of years later. The early Christians saw a deep connection between Eve and Mary, the mother of Jesus. Eve, the first mother, whose choice helped bring death into the world, and Mary, whose yes helped bring life back into it. They called Mary the new Eve, the woman whose faithfulness answered the first woman's fall. Two mothers, standing at the two great turning points of the human story. But that does not diminish Eve. It honors her, because it means her story was never really about a fruit. It was about motherhood. The first motherhood, with all its joy and all its unbearable grief. And it was about hope surviving in a broken world, carried forward by a woman who lost everything and kept on giving life anyway. She was the first to live, the first to love, the first to lose, the first to grieve, and the first to hope again after grief. The mother of all the living. That was the complete life of Eve. If this told you the whole story of the first woman, not just the garden, but her entire life and the grief no one talks about, subscribe. Because we tell the complete human lives behind the figures everyone thinks they already know. Tell me in the comments what moved you most. That she faced the first birth with no one to guide her? That she suffered the loneliest grief in history when she lost her son? Or that she dared to love again and became the mother of us all? I read every comment. Thank you for walking her whole life with me. I'll see you in the next one.